So we're particularly pleased to have a panel tonight that engages with this sense of community through diplomacy and the role that sports plays and can play in enhancing our relations, expanding those one-to-one and community connections and promoting culture, ideas, education and tourism as well. So as I said, this evening is going to be chaired by Professor Byrne, who's brought together a great panel of extremely interesting individuals. We had a walk through the exhibition before in the gallery, and sports people particularly who have been key in this region. I'm just briefly going to introduce people now so that Caitlin can get into the conversation. So on the first person on my left here, Aaron Alsop, Director of High Performance Sport, Papua New Guinea Sports Foundation. Next to Aaron is Timothy Walsh, coach of the first women's rugby sevens team. Next to Timothy is Andrew Minogue, Chief Executive Officer, the Pacific Games Council. And of course, next to Andrew, Amelia Kuk, former rugby sevens player. So thank you to everyone tonight for partaking in this discussion, and thank you, Caitlin, for chairing.
Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. And thanks, Sarah. It's really a delight to be here. This is my first perspectives as Director of Griffith Asia Institute, so it's lovely to be here. We're really proud of the partnership that we have with QAGOMA, and thank you very much for hosting us. Number 6 is pretty good already. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we're gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm really glad, Sarah, your introduction was perfect. You know, we often don't put art and sport or culture and sport and politics, sport and diplomacy in the same kind of basket. But certainly when we're thinking about these things, we think about ritual, craft, people, community. In many ways, both art and sport represent the way we live. So it's really no surprise that we should get onto the topic of sport. And it's no surprise then that sport is inherent to the way that we engage with the rest of the world, the way we represent ourselves and the way we communicate beyond our borders. I'm absolutely thrilled to have this brilliant panel, particularly because they all have expertise as players, coaches, managers, administrators of sport in the region within which we live. And I think this is the region where Australia and Australia's sports diplomacy strategy has so much relevance. So I wanted to start with our panel talking about sport and the significance of sport really relating to the way we live as part of our culture, and in particular part of the culture across the Pacific Islands. And I'm going to start with Amelia and just ask, where do you see, how significant has sport been for you, certainly as a player that's come to play at a very elite level?
I think sport is definitely very important back home and here as well. And it's, I think you can say it's so important that it could be as like part of a religion, in fact, because I'm going to be biased and talk about rugby, but with rugby league, I know it's a national sport back home and everyone kind of follows rugby league, and like especially the hunters, and they follow it, and it's like she said in the introduction, it's you meet people that you probably would never talk to or on a daily basis, but when it comes to sport, like it brings together that unity and unites people from different backgrounds. They come together for one common cause, and that's to either play footy or support the team and then just get along with each other. So yeah, it's really big.
And Amelia, you come from PNG, that's your homeland?
Yes.
And we have a few people in the audience from PNG. Great to have you here. We expect lots of talk about rugby. So yeah, thanks. That's really fantastic. Aaron, I'm going to come to you next, and I'm going to put up a couple of images actually. Sure. And whether you wanted to talk to this.
Yeah. It's, for our one-tocs in the room, everyone knows who our two athletes are on the board there. Stephen Curry in the middle with the kundu drum, and to our right is Dikatoa. So this is a photo that was taken when we landed from Glasgow, which was the 2014 Commonwealth Games. They both had just won gold medals in the weightlifting. We had about 50,000 people waiting for us at the airport, and the motorcade.
50,000? Did you just say 50,000?
Yeah, so the motorcade from the airport through to the city I'd never experienced that at the time. It was pretty amazing. It was about 3 to 4 hours it took us to drive through the city, and it was pretty amazing what they'd both done. So very proud of what they're doing, and they're in training at the moment for the next Com Games on the Gold Coast.
So a real sense of celebrating sport and culture.
I mean, I lived in Australia my whole life before I moved to PNG 5 years ago, and I thought Australians were sport crazy, but what that had done for Papua New Guinea, I'm pretty sure that everyone was out of their homes and on the streets watching and supporting them. So it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
Did you want to talk to this one as well?
Yeah, I just think this was a pretty significant moment for us. We had a very challenging event that happened in the university campus at UPNG in 2016 with some challenges with the police and students, and some people got hurt. So this was an event that celebrated the International Day for University Sport, and it could have been a risk because it was the first time that we'd actually got all the university campuses back together to play sport as a way to show some unity. It's an international day that's celebrated worldwide, so it's on the 20th of September every year. And this was a significant moment for us that we'd been able to put all of that aside and use it as reconciliation for the universities. We had no incidents on the day, we had no student protests, we had nothing. It was just sport, and it was men's and women's teams playing mixed sport together, which was really nice. So. It was a wonderful day, just having the students there, forgetting about the pressures of the outside world and focused on playing, which was nice.
Yeah. Andrew, you spend a lot of time in the Pacific. You're constantly travelling. We're really lucky we've nailed him here tonight. Yeah. From your perspective, right across the Pacific, how important is sport as an element of culture?
I think it's terrifically important right across the Pacific. I think the first picture you're going to show is my favourite photo of all the games I've worked on in the last 10 years in the Pacific Games. This is in 2015 in Papua New Guinea, Rugby League Nines, which was a gold medal event for PNG. And I think the crowd is almost bursting out of that grandstand. The angles on that photo are just fantastic, and I think that encapsulates what sport means to PNG. And across the Pacific, it's perhaps not as intense as that at times, but it's still a very important part of the culture. The next one is also from those games, netball. We in our games try very hard to make sure that women are included in the program as much as possible, and we're trying to get all of our sports aligned so that there's equality between men and women. Netball is a very strong sport in the Commonwealth members of the Pacific. If I had more time to go through all my old files, I would have found at our last games again in PNG, we had women's boxing for the first time, which culturally is a little bit of a challenge in some of the countries to actually have women in the ring fighting each other. But because it's now in the Olympic and Commonwealth Games program, it's being increasingly accepted. Weightlifting and some of the other sports as well, women are very prominent. So across the Pacific, it's very strong. The last photo behind me is, I think, of archery. Is it all the archery is lining up? That's in New Caledonia in the 2011 Games. A little bit of a south of France feel to the buildings in the back, but in our games, bringing the Pacific together, it's the sort of biggest manifestation of the Pacific. When we have the games, we've got sort of 4,000 athletes and officials from 22 islands. We've got a lot of countries that we know very well here in Australia, like PNG and Tonga and Samoa, Vanuatu and Fiji, but we've also got the French Pacific, so there's New Caledonia, Tahiti. We've got the Americans, which is Guam, American Samoa, the Marianas. So there's a bit of influence from all around the world in the Pacific, but sport is very important to all of them. And I think it's demonstrated by the fact that we get good numbers of athletes at our games and lots of different countries hosting them.
A lot of enthusiasm.
It certainly is.
Bursting with enthusiasm. Tim, coming from the perspective of the ARU, a code, you know, how do you see sport embedded within the culture of the region?
Yeah, well, I love to see sport and art actually fusing together, because I think the way we play the game can be a bit of art form sometimes, so that's good.
Creative license. Yeah.
But look, the impact that sport has, but particularly the Olympics and rugby sevens, I feel has just been huge on the world in so many different levels. And you take Fiji, for example. I was actually in Fiji last week. But I go there a lot because it's the spiritual home of sevens. You know, it's a religion, it's a culture there. But nearly everywhere you travel from the resort to the field, and nearly every turn you go across, there'll be someone there with a rugby ball, whether it be on concrete or on grass or on, you know, just anything, just playing the game. And then you see the Fijian men's team win this gold medal and just catapult Fiji, and using sport as that vehicle, into international stardom, I guess. Like, the world's watching Fiji, and the implications you can have from that. You know, they're on $7 notes for the number 7. Like, it's incredible. We didn't get that, by the way. But
Are there policy people in the room?
But the coach also got a block of land as well. Anyway, but from the women's point of view, like, the impact we've had on the game and on equality and women, similar to the women boxing and that kind of thing. But to see women sevens or women play rugby and represent and win, it was an incredible timing, but to catapult women's sport, but also equality in the world. So it's just sport is just an incredible vehicle to or power to send messages and to make the most of them. So it's
So sports diplomacy has kind of created this revolution in a way in diplomacy. Shout out to my colleague Stuart Murray, who has really been at the forefront of a lot of the theoretical work on sport and diplomacy, writing a great deal. Stuart, of course, I know you'd say there's nothing really all that new about it. This is something that goes back millennia, but it has certainly found a good deal of traction right around the world. There are some different schools of thought around the way that some people view sports diplomacy. For some, it might be seen purely as a tool that is connected to the state, something that advances the interests of the nation state. For others who take a much broader view, sport and diplomacy is something that overcomes difference. It helps countries actually work out points of difference when traditional diplomacy might not. So it can bring nations together, and it can bring people together in a very different way, well outside the agenda of the state. So, Andrew, I'm starting with you on this, and I note you have a background in diplomacy as well. So I'd be interested to hear your view on how you see sport and diplomacy, and what can sport achieve as a diplomatic tool?
Thank you, Caitlin. I think I've got a photo behind me that is very interesting. I think in Australia it's not always appreciated or understood what China is doing in the South Pacific in relation to sports diplomacy. They are taking, I think, the first part of your introduction to this question about advancing nation-state interests very seriously. We'll talk about Australia, I think, in the next segment. I've got some slides for that too. This is Port Vila, Vanuatu. They're hosting an event for us at the start of December. And this is the main stadium complex, which is going to house athletics, football, rugby, and there's some indoor halls associated with it. So the heart of the games is going to be at that Corman Stadium venue in Port Vila. It's being fully funded by China, under soft loans that may or may not have to be repaid, depending on how things advance in that relationship. The photo is the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, Charlo Salwai, going down to that facility as it's under construction now. It'll be finished in about 6 weeks. He's there with the Chinese ambassador and a lot of the construction company that comes out from China. They bring all their workers, they bring all the equipment. a lot of prefabricated stuff. And they are, in return, seeking to advance their national interest very strongly, whether it's through the United Nations and the recognition of China rather than Taiwan, which a bunch of Pacific countries are associated with Taiwan. So China is very aggressive in keeping their countries in the tent, and they will do whatever they can to succeed in keeping these countries on side. And one of the things that countries like Vanuatu and others want over a period is the ability to be able to run a major sporting event, provide sporting facilities for their young. A lot of these countries have very young populations. They're developing, a lot of families coming to the city looking for work. The kids need something to do, and the Chinese are only too happy to build these sort of facilities for the kids of the future. So there's something in it for both countries, clearly. There's something in it for us with our games, and we're grateful for it, but they are very much advancing their national interest through this program. And I think Australia does that as well, but perhaps looks at the bigger picture and the rounder approach to developing society more generally.
Can I ask a follow-up question there? You know, when you're building these big pieces of infrastructure, how easy is that then to maintain?
It's not.
Yeah.
And Aaron will tell you, in Papua New Guinea, they had the Games in 1991, and when we had the Games 24 years later, in 2015, every venue had to start from scratch.
Right.
They'd all decayed. I mean, it's hot, it's humid, downpours of rain, dry season, they get knocked around. It's very expensive to run electricity, and swimming pools is very difficult with pumping and chemicals and everything. So one of the challenges for us in our games, and the job that I do, is to go into these countries and say, we're only here for 2 weeks. Our event is 14 days maximum. Please don't build something just for us. When you talk to China, or if you're funding it yourselves, make sure you ask for and just insist on a facility you can manage into the future, because China will build that and largely walk away and go on to the next project or the next country, and the country is left to manage the facility. So we do have some challenges ahead of us with that sort of thing.
Aaron, I might come to you now, and I'm going to flick through a couple so that you... Oh, no, actually, I will, so that you can talk to this PNG experience as well. I'm putting things a little out of order, I apologise, but it works quite well.
For a lot of people, you'd look at that and wonder why it's here. This was my second day in country. I was in PNG as a volunteer, and there'll be something I think I'll show later, but this was actually my second day in PNG under my role as the high performance manager. We had less than 18 months to the Pacific Games in 2015, and we had no training facility because all of the other facilities were under construction to get ready for the Games. So we had 18 months to get 28 sports ready, essentially 700 athletes that had no training facilities. So it was a challenge, but this facility was just an empty shed. We wanted to create a high performance training centre, which would be the base of our operations for high performance. It was a shed that was pretty bad condition, hadn't been touched for 7 years, and it wasn't in a great, safe area. But for us, we needed a home. We needed somewhere to train. We needed somewhere to put our sports med clinic. We needed somewhere to do training and education courses, that sort of thing. So myself and some local friends that I'd met converted this facility into the next photo in just under 11 weeks. Which in PNG's, for our friends that are from PNG, they usually know what that's like. We did it for about a 25th of the price of what we were quoted, because we did a lot of it ourselves. We had some great local partners that really helped, but without the support, I think, of expertise in Australia that had built these sort of facilities and that before, it was only a refit, but the equipment that you can see there, we're able to get a 15-year warranty on. The conditions in PNG are very challenging with the heat, the sweat, dust. And the athletes named it their safe haven. You know, it was a place that they could come and shower. We built a shower block. Right. We provided food. They could get fresh water. They could come and train, but they could hang out. You know, their training sessions were only 2 hours long, but they'd be there for 5 or 6 hours because they're just catching up with their friends, and it was a space that they could get away from the challenges of outside life to come and be a part of it. We put a sign up out the front, this is the home of PNG, because we wanted them to feel it was theirs. We've now moved into one of the new buildings that was built for the Pacific Games, but we missed the shed. It was 40 odd degrees heat. We'd probably get 300 blackouts a fortnight, but we didn't care. It was our home.
Yeah. So there's an internal diplomatic element, isn't there? You
Absolutely.
know, something that brings people together.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you also to talk to the relevance of this picture as well.
Yeah, so that's Tim's backyard. No, just joking. That's Gold Coast. And particularly the bottom right-hand corner here is the facility called Runaway Bay Super Sports Centre. It's on the Gold Coast. We've now had over 20 high-performance training camps at this facility. And it all came about back in 2014. For the first time, we had the Olympic Committee of PNG, this PNG Sports Foundation, and our government, our minister, sports minister, came down to the Gold Coast. And through diplomatic relationships, we were able to help create an MOU with the city. So Papua New Guinea actually is the only city of the Commonwealth, only country of the Commonwealth that has an MOU with the host city for the next Commonwealth Games. And we're proud of the work that we did to build that relationship. It's been an ongoing relationship now for over 3 years. And we're, even though that, and this is one of the leadership programs, so as you can see there's 36 Papua New Guineans and me as the ring-in, to provide a leadership program for coaches and athletes that we ran on the Gold Coast. So we're really grateful for that partnership through Mayor Tom Tate, and the great work done by Craig Rousell, who's a part of that program. And this has become our second home. And funny enough, we can actually train and stay there cheaper than we can do training programs at home.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So it's a great environment for our athletes to get away from external pressures, but build fantastic relationships where local universities can bring in students, or partners that are on the Gold Coast that have been able to help create the right environment for us to be there. So,
and that's an interesting case when you're thinking about diplomacy, because we often forget that cities, increasingly are diplomatic actors, and the Gold Coast, has kind of taken that initiative with the Games as I guess the catalyst for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've done a great job.
And for anyone that might have visited the Number One Neighbour exhibition that has been here, we know that Australia and PNG has had a troubled relationship. So these are some of those inroads into the relationship that can make a difference, I guess.
Absolutely.
I'd like to come to you, Tim, because we often then we don't necessarily think that sporting codes might be interested in diplomacy. So I wonder if you see a perspective or a dimension for sporting codes to play a role in that space.
Yeah, I do, but I think with power comes responsibility, and sport has a lot of power. I mean, I always talk about rugby, but you got 95 World Cup in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, deracialisation, democracy, it sort of galvanised the country and changed the way, the whole psyche of it. So I don't know, it was used as a vehicle, and is it fair that sport becomes that diplomat? And I use the other example, my son, he's 3 now, but when he was 2, he just started to walk and run and whatever, and I said to him, do you want to go jogging? He's like,
what are you talking about?
And we went out, and he just started to run, and he just could not stop laughing. It was the most freedom, fun thing he'd ever done, and sport just has this beauty about it that doesn't need to involve all this other stuff. But with that power, which it has, it's modern day. I wouldn't say war, but it's a vehicle to produce that. So with that power is that responsibility. So yes, I think athletes and administrators do need to take on that responsibility, that they are diplomats and have a huge amount of power to shape and create so many opportunities within countries and beneficial ones, internally and externally.
I want to get to that sports people as diplomats question in a second, but before we do, it's probably worth noting Australia some years ago, in 2015, I think, I'm looking at our DFAT people, launched the Australian Sports Diplomacy Strategy. A world first, actually. The first time, I think, that a Ministry for Foreign Affairs has formally said sport is a soft power asset. From grassroots to the global stage, we will utilise sport to connect people and institutions, to showcase Australia's credentials and capabilities, to become a leader in innovation and integrity, and to enhance development outcomes. So it puts a good deal of stock on what sport might be able to achieve. So, Aaron, I'm coming back to you. Are we asking too much of sport in that context?
It's a great question. I think until actually I'd met yourself, I'd never even knew that Australia had a sports diplomacy strategy. And yet here I was as an Aussie. That was a photo of myself when I was a volunteer living in a village called Vabakori for our PNG friends. It's the home of volleyball in PNG. And I went there just as a volunteer. I was only supposed to go for a week, and I'd packed for a week, but ended up staying for 11 weeks. And it's a small fishing village, but 10 of the 12 national volleyball players come from this one village, 3 bloodlines. So how that turned into a gold medal at the Mini Pacific Games in 2013, which was their first in volleyball, which then turned into a contract for me to stay and work in the last 5 years as high performance director, has been a story that I didn't think sport would be that role. And I think for me that even though the pressure was never on me because I'm not paid by Australian government or Aussie HiCom or DFAT or anything, my agenda going there was to genuinely help that country in sport. And they felt that I was able to help them do that because of the results I'd done as a volunteer, where my motive was not money. It was purely to go and help. So I think that we have a role, provided that it's like the passion that you have for sport. Do you do it as an amateur, or do you do it now because it's a contract and it's a pay? And I think that because my passion has not become because it's my job, I love what I do. I work 7 days a week, 100 hours a week, because it's what I love to do. Whereas I
can vouch for that. You are a non-stop worker.
Yeah, but I think I do that because my team does.
Yeah.
The staff around me are passionate about how they see that sport has a way to change their country.
Yeah.
So it was not deliberately that we used diplomacy or the role of what it can play. It was just the fact that there was enough people around me that bought into our vision of where high performance could take sport in Papua New Guinea. We won the games in 2015, which is why the government at the time continued to want to fund high performance. So we were grateful that they saw the work that we'd put in. But in saying that, now that I understand that there is a strategy, I think it's important for me to look at, okay, how do I use human resources? I'm not asking for money, it's more human resources and expertise of people that genuinely want to come and help our country. Papua New Guinea. I say that as an Aussie, but I'm Papua New Guinean being here. Because for me, the stories that I'd heard and the wisdom that Andrew has shared with me over the years of the work that he's done. My wife's from Samoa, they're hosting the next Pacific Games, and I can already see what's happening in her home country that's so powerful that I don't know anything else that can do what it's going to do for those countries. So we're always on the lookout for people that want to help. We don't always have the resources to provide for them, but my feeling has been that if that's their motivation anyway, they're probably usually not the right people to probably connect to the project anyway. So.
And Andrew, how about you? You've been involved and you've been on the Australian diplomacy side, not necessarily while there's been a strategy in place, but how effective can sport be?
Very effective, and to go back to your first question, I don't think it's asking too much of sport at all to be involved in this area. About 20 years ago, when I started in the move from diplomacy over to the Games movement, Australia's diplomatic efforts around sport in the Pacific were to try and get some elite athletes to come to the Sydney Olympics and the Melbourne Commonwealth Games. It was pitched at that elite level. And I think over the last decade, as this strategy has been worked up and now is fully developed, there's a lot more emphasis on using sport for development. And I think I've got some pictures there of some young kids. There's some AusAid branding on the sports equipment. That one in particular with the women's cricket in the village. In the Pacific, we have a big problem with non-communicable diseases, obesity, and trying to get people moving. Kids, mothers returning back to the village after giving birth and all that sort of thing. And I think DFAT is to be applauded for what they're doing there in resourcing the village. At the very village level, it's not the elite athletes anymore. It's going down to the grassroots, getting the kids at schools and the people in the village, as you've seen in these photos, and getting them access to sports facilities and equipment and a little bit of help. And Australia does that very well here, and it's not too much to ask at all for our sports through our government agencies to invest a little bit in the Pacific, and I think it'll pay big dividends. It needs to, because the health issues out there are very, very significant.
Thanks. I guess we've touched on this idea of sport and sports people, particularly when they're well known, becoming the kind of flag bearer for the nation. Amelia, you've felt that as captain of the PNG Women's Sevens and now as a player for the Australian Rugby League, Women's Rugby League. Is it fair that we put this responsibility onto the sports people?
It's a very good question. I think that, I play rugby because I absolutely love the sport, and I don't see it as a huge responsibility to represent the country that you come from and put on that jersey at the end of the day. But I think everything else, kind of Tim said, with great power comes great responsibility. So I'm slowly. This is my actually first year of playing rugby league, and I was lucky enough to put on the Jillaroos jersey at the start of the year. But it's slowly getting to the point where people are starting to recognise women in sport, and especially coming from Papua New Guinea. I played with the women's sevens team for a while, and I remember making my debut in 2015 when we played in Hong Kong. Our camping ground, we were at a prison, so we were based in Bomana prison, for those of you who know where that is. And we would wake up in the morning and I'd get a phone call from my dad and he goes, "Oh, how's camp going?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just training with some inmates here." And the prisoners actually had to come and cook us breakfast and lunch and dinner, and it was we were not allowed to make eye contact with them, and it was such a new experience for me, growing up overseas and going back home to experience that. And I think it was an eye-opener for me as well. It was a very humbling experience for me to play with the PNG women's side for 2 years. And Erin's done a great job back home. I played in the Pacific Games, and all we had for training was literally just rugby balls and a field that was half gravel, and there's very little grass there, so we're tackling each other, and there's grazes everywhere, and then there's no ice baths. I think afterwards you just kind of recover as you go, and the training's just intense every day. We train for ridiculous amounts of hours every day, and just didn't really understand what the point of it was at the end of the day. But it all paid off at the end. But when they opened up the gym, it was really good to see even little things as after they took us to our training sessions, they'd give little cups of Powerade, and that means nothing here, but back then it was everything, because you're oh, that's just a little bit of helping you with recovery and stuff. And they give protein shakes afterwards. They all gave us little shakers and gave us protein. They were educating the players on the importance of recovery, and I think the sports science behind it, which is really, really important, because we didn't really understand that. Well, I felt it wasn't really advertised properly, being the national, playing the national team and having coaches of that level. But it's
and are these really things exciting that you can take back home? We've heard about some of the health issues in the region, issues around sanitation. Are these things that you can take back home and that you become a role model for?
Yeah, I think especially coming from that background and then seeing how PNG sport is played out to like now being in the Australian team and then seeing how they're treated here, like it's so different from back home. But over the years, like it's slowly getting there. And especially with the, I'm going to talk about Rugby League now, but with the World Cup at the end of the year, there's a game next week for the Prime Minister's Cup. So the Jillaroos, the women's team, are versing the PNG women's team, and that's creating history because that has never happened before. Right. And yeah, to see that they're getting sponsors on board now, and that women in sport and in rugby especially, they're slowly working towards that professional level that we want to get at, is really, really good to see. And for the girls here to go back to the home country, like I think that comes down to like diplomacy as well and the relations between each country to see where like what sport can do. And from like the Pacific Games as well, like there was that opening ceremony where I think like all of PNG kind of stood up and they were so proud to be from PNG because that's your country. And then you could see like the athletes walking out, and I think there was a lot of tears in the crowd there because they were just so proud to be from Papua New Guinea back then, and that made the athletes feel so.
There's a two-way connection, right?
Yeah. So it's so amazing what sport can do, but I don't feel like it's like a big responsibility at all because you do it for the love of the game.
Tim, as a coach, we've seen some Australian sports people behaving badly on the world stage. And so that role of being a diplomat doesn't always fit that neatly. How do you prepare athletes, or do you? Do you think that it's something that's innate, and some people have it, others, there may be no hope for?
Yeah, I don't think anyone like Charlotte Caslick or an Emily Cherry Green start out playing sport so they can be the world's best players, so they can kick off their politics career. But with that sort of responsibility, or with that sort of power, there becomes opportunity. And the things that these players see when they travel and the impact that they have, then it's an opportunity, and it's tough. That's your responsibility now. So that's, I guess, that sort of borderline is I'm doing this for fun and enjoyment, but now all of a sudden it's very serious in terms of what I can do, for the world or for my country. So, in preparing them, definitely, whether it be media training or education. I know from when we go around the world and to different places, we always try and take something away from that country, something that we, have learnt about it, that we can, expand our knowledge. And most of it's done interactively and quite creatively and fun, but we always try and bring something away from that country. So when we do, or we have better knowledge around, the way things operate and what, I don't know, different things that we can learn from. So I think a lot more work needs to be done at that level, particularly when you get stories and they're continually, and the media is continually after a story that's going to defame the sport or the player or whatever it is. So I think there's a lot more can be done around that, and a lot of it's just education, and that's the power of
kind of key.
Yeah.
Very much.
Aaron, you've actually got a couple of photos here. This is one, and I think with the players here.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk to this from that diplomat perspective?
Yeah, I think this is our team walking out for the opening ceremony at the 2015 Pacific Games. It's at home in PNG. It was in a stadium that was filled with about, I can't remember the numbers, Andrew. 20,000 spectators, but honestly, it would have felt like the whole country was there watching. It was my ears rung for hours after that.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, the reason that I remember the stories that were told, walking through with this crowd, I'm in there somewhere. I just wanted to look at the athletes' faces. I wasn't actually looking up in the crowd to try and wave to people. I was trying to remember the faces of our athletes that had literally sacrificed everything to be there. And I know what they'd gone through to get that uniform to walk out there and represent the country. And for me, I think that the message that has shared with us now, you can't equip athletes for that moment. but it allows you that tool to say, okay, do you understand the gravity that your country is relying on you? We're trying to be here to prep you for the pressures of the moment. This is a chance for them just to relax and put their, get ready for the next day of competition. But it was something that for me was that solidifying that moment of this is why you worked so hard for what it was and why we kept you on the short and narrows to get ready for this.
Yeah.
Because now isn't it all worth it? And that was a thing that I didn't want them to have, those slip-ups of their behaviours or discipline issues leading into it, to miss out on that. And they hadn't even played sport yet.
Yeah, that's right. That's a fabulous moment, isn't it? And Andrew, you've got a couple of images here too about some key people.
Yeah, if we just go back to that last one though, that's with the team PNG walking into the stadium, the tradition of an opening ceremony is the home team comes in last. But just before them, with the other countries coming through, Australia and New Zealand, for the first time we invited them to the games in PNG. So that was a diplomatic challenge to get the acceptance of that. Unfortunately, the crowd gave them a good cheer, both of them. One of the New Zealand athletes, however, on social media, in the stadium, on his phone, made some derogatory comments about the home country, got into the media, and he was expelled from the game. So even a joyous, wonderful moment like that has its diplomatic challenges. It's in sport as well. Coming back to role models, I think as in Australia and in the developed countries where we follow sport globally, we know there's often a struggle with athletes having to take on that responsibility of being a role model. Their behaviour, how they spend their money, all those sorts of things come into the media's focus. In the Pacific, I think life's a lot more innocent, and their sporting heroes really are gods to them and can often do no wrong. Toya Whistle, the Papua New Guinea sprint queen, as we call her, been to the last couple of Olympics. She's a fantastic runner, has a fascinating life story, this lady, coming out of one of the PNG villages, essentially didn't receive an education, but has been able to produce outstanding results. She's based here in Queensland. She's been profiled on Channel 7 Sunrise, and whether she likes it or not, she is in that position of representing her country in a very public way. Next one is Lynn Lulu. Annie's a table tennis player from Vanuatu. She's now got a couple of kids. They're about to host the games, so the mini games in December. The country is desperate for her to keep her career going. You've got to play Annie in the home game. She's got kids at home. She's got all these new responsibilities. Because she, like Toya, has been to several Olympics and has really performed for her country and became a very significant role model known throughout the country. These people are household names, as a lot of sports people are in ours. But whether they like it or not, they have to play that role model role because it's thrust upon them, and sport is important, as we said at the very outset of this presentation. It's a big part of their culture.
I thought that was a particularly good image, particularly because, it brings us back to ping pong diplomacy, which is very well known to those of you who follow the trajectory of sport and diplomacy and these great moments in diplomatic history. And I was going to ask one final question about the games we play. As nations, we love to play these games, whether it's the Pacific Games, the Olympic Games, the Com Games. We love to host, we love to be part of it. Any final word from any of you on the forthcoming Gold Coast Games? Are there particular opportunities that we really need to capture? You look like you've got something to say there, Andrew. So I might throw to you.
There's two things I'm looking out for. I'm based on the Gold Coast, and I'm a volunteer on one of the committees that reports to the Goldoc board. It looks after the sports program. I've done a few different things on a voluntary basis down there with 2018 games, and they are very determined to try and change the image of the Gold Coast as more than just tourism, the meter maids, the beaches. They are trying to position the city in a new light, that people can see it from the cultural perspective, the Indigenous perspective, the future of the young people coming up in that city. I sat on the tendering committee who awarded the contract for the opening and closing ceremonies, and that was a huge feature of that decision, was how are you going to sell in front of everybody at that big opening ceremony a new way of thinking about the Gold Coast. The other thing I'm looking for Queensland, and perhaps tying into here in Brisbane, there's been a little bit of talk over the last couple of years about Brisbane hosting an Olympic Games. I think it's the next city in Australia that should do it. They did a terrific job of their legs of the Asian Cup football tournament, which I think sold this city to Asia. And I think the Commonwealth Games, in going to some Asian countries, obviously, not all, but throughout Africa, the Caribbean and the Greater Britain, I think there's a real opportunity to sell Queensland to be able to host a really big one in the future, and I think that'll get a kick along next year.
We will. You heard it here first, ladies and
That's
gentlemen.
what I was going to say.
I stole his thunder.
That was
Sorry,
your comment.
buddy.
And Aaron?
Yeah, well, I think we were very deliberate about our strategy of utilising the Gold Coast as the next host city way back in 2014, and that's why we set up the MOU with the city. We've been very deliberate about using Gold Coast as a training hub for our overseas training camps and competitions, because we want them to get familiar with the environment down there. I know that there's certainly perceptions about some areas of the city. I lived there for a couple of years before I moved to PNG. So it's one of those things that for us, I think the city's actually doing a great job to position itself in a way that how is it blending a lot of elements. I know that from us, as again another diplomacy strategy, is around how do we utilise education. We have no sport education in PNG, so there's nowhere that you can go and do certificates, diplomas, bachelors in any area of sport at all. So it's one of those things that we're trying to look at ways to use Trade Investment Queensland or potentially some other education partners, university level, TAFE Queensland, these sort of bodies that here's the event coming in your backyard, but what other things are happening in Queensland that the other departments of Queensland government could look at to promote and help our neighbouring countries. So we've been very deliberate about that. TAFE Queensland is one of the sponsors of the Games. We've utilised the education partners of the Games. So we have a coaches study tour that's coming up next month on the Gold Coast with 30 coaches from PNG coming to the Gold Coast. We're visiting Bond University, we're visiting Griffith, some of the other professional teams on the Gold Coast. So it's something that for me, I think that the city itself has been very good at opening all those doors for us.
So more than just 14 days.
It's been a couple of years for us, and the solidification will be that we hope to be a top 12 nation at the Com Games, but then moving forward, what's the legacy for our relationship after that? So it's exciting.
And Amelia, last word with you. From a player perspective, how important are these big games?
Oh, they're really important, like especially if you want to go higher in sport and continue to do that for years to come. Like for like the young athletes coming through as well, like they have something to work towards, and that's like a goal or a dream that they set for themselves. So like to make the Commonwealth Games in a particular sport that they play in that team, or like the Olympics. So it gives them that kind of drive to work hard for themselves and just keep pushing until they achieve that dream.
Yeah. Fantastic. We've got a few minutes. I might open up to the floor if we've got any questions. Okay, hands straight up. We'll go right to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the panelists. Let me start off by saying this. Brisbane will be invaded next week. Yes, invaded by friendly supporters and friends of Esperanta's team, who have entered the grand final in the Queensland Cup. So you'll find a lot of Papua here next week to support our team and enjoy this beautiful city. In PNG, we made rugby, not only rugby league, but sports fan. So the statement by Andrew that maybe 20, 30 or 40,000 people waited for Diga Tau when she arrived with the gold medalist. Diga Tau and Stephen Curry, yes. It's true, you know. They just wanted to come and see whoever brought the gold medalist and put PNG on the world map or Commonwealth map or however they like to put it. Last year we hosted the World Under-19 Women's Soccer competition. PNG did not qualify to enter that competition. We were given a space because we were hosting it. So in the pool that we were in, I think one of those games, North Korea defeated us 10-0 or something, you know. But that was the last pool game for North Korea before they went into the semi-finals. So they put in all their reserve grade, all their, they kept all their best players to enter the finals. So the second-rated team defeated our best team, but it did not stop our supporters from going to support them.
Yeah.
In all the games that PNG went into play, the stadiums were full to the capacity. No.
So it's a great strategy to have diplomacy as part of that, sport as part of that relationship.
Yes.
Now,
2 years ago.
I do have to ask if you have a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to that. 2 years ago, we hosted the SP competition at the SP Games, and it actually united the country. But my comment and question is in regard to Rugby League. Rugby League has been a national sport in PNG for a long time. But at the international level, we haven't done really well.
Yeah.
And my question is, I don't think Australia is doing enough to support Rugby League in PNG or in this region. We know Australia Rugby League is the world's number one rugby league playing nation in the world. Yeah. New Zealand is providing some competition, if any. But then, the New Zealand Kiwi side are all playing down in the national Australian Rugby League competition. So, the competition is coming from NRL itself. So, master coaches like Wayne Bennett, why has he opted to go and coach England rather than he should come up to Papua New Guinea? Because as we are preparing for the World Cup, which will be hosted very shortly.
I might need to stop you there, but ask if anyone wanted to comment on that.
It's a good point because we actually had a recent group discussion with the NRL, some members from QRL, the Lowry Institute, and Amelia was one of those athletes that was down there around. People thought Australia just say, okay, how have we used rugby league as a sport diplomacy strategy? I think I have some comments about that and also have some research and evidence about the tagline that people use as rugby league is our national sport. It's a popular sport, but the data actually doesn't support that actual statement. However, it's popular, right? So when you look at our TV ratings for NRL, our TV ratings in PNG are massive for rugby league because we get every game on live TV up there. So Australia doesn't even get that. You've got to pay TV. So if you're a fan, you should move over. But the strategy around that was, how does Australia use what they're doing? I think next weekend, we love Amelia. We're very proud of what she's done in rugby sevens for PNG. And then when she decided to transition over to have a go at rugby league and she's made the Jillaroos, she will be an absolute superstar up there next weekend because one of their own has been able to do something that someone hasn't done before, which is represent the green and gold in a sport that we love. So as much as we want to convince her to come back to play for us in Rugby Sevens at the Com Games next year, hint, hint, we'll encourage her career because we know that it could be a profession for her. So I do see the work behind the scenes that Australia Rugby League and NRL are doing in the Pacific through their education program. They do go to schools, they encourage kids to stay in school, they bring health messages to the school. So they are doing a lot, but it's in a different area than just high performance. They're not going to come and help us try and get the Kumul's rating back up to where it was in fourth in the world. There's some political things and structural things within the sport that need to get right for that to happen. But in the meantime, they're doing a lot of stuff at the grassroots level through a number of the Pacific countries. And I know that Fiji and Samoa are really moving along with their junior NRL programs as well, which are funded by them. So there's some things happening up there, and I think that their support, particularly for the Orchids, our women's rugby league program, has been really good. So it's nice to see.
We probably can do one more question.
I say that rugby league, not rugby league, but sports can really play part in diplomacy role. But I see there are some limits in terms of really include those who are not fortunate, especially those in the remote areas, who could really play a good part in sports in order for it to make it inclusive. So what are some of the plans, especially the PNG Sports Foundation or Australia, to extend this to include most of the wider communities across the region, including Papua New Guinea?
That's a huge challenge, isn't it, particularly for PNG. Aaron or Amelia, did you want to comment on bringing sport to the remote areas of the country?
Amelia's from Hagen, so Mount Hagen. It's a Highlands regional area that usually doesn't get a lot of access to support like we see in the major sort of coastal city, Lae or Port Moresby. Amelia this year was up there. Was it this year? You were up there over Christmas, and she was sharing her story with the village, which is not often that a female would get that sort of voice in the village environment. But we saw some images of it, and I think a lot of people were quite surprised at the impact that, as a female athlete, that she's had, and to hear elders in the village listening to what she had to share about that career. So our strategies in high performance sport for PNG has been very deliberate on duplicating the success of what we've done in Port Moresby and Lae now to the other regions. So we have a very deliberate strategy. One of those is what we call Reach the Regions, so we are deliberately going to the regional areas to do that. We're engaged with James Cook University at the moment on a talent ID research project around where the talent hotspots are through PNG, using some anthropometric and performance testing to benchmark those against our national team athletes and going out to the regional levels. Kids between the age of 14 and 19 are being tested and looked at how that might fit into the bigger scope. And funny enough, a lot of that work has been done because of models that have been used through Solomon Islands. We know the Indigenous communities in Australia have done some similar things. I know friends and family from Samoa that have done some similar things. Fiji have done some approaches before. So there are strategies around doing those things, but we also know that there's government pressure on things like health, hospitals, schools, roads. So sports had a fair share of the pie for a little bit, and we need to make sure that when we're going to those remote areas, what's the message that we're doing? Is there capacity building happening in that space? So if we go and do something in sport, how are we helping the local teachers be better at what they do? How are we helping local health professionals learn a bit more about healthy lifestyle, diet, exercise, giving females an opportunity? So there's usually that sport for development message through a high performance strategy, which is something that people sort of usually haven't attached to high performance sport here in Australia. So
different context, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amelia, how important is it to you to go home, to go back into some of those remote areas?
Yeah, it's really important. I think because where I come from, like up in the Highlands, there's they look at men as like higher than women, and they don't really put us on the same level. You know, like when you look at a girl or a woman, you automatically, like growing up, you thought that they're like meant to stay at home and cook and look after their children, whereas the men can do what they want and go after what their dreams are. And especially with sport, like if you're a girl and you play sport, like it's like frowned upon because it's like, what are you doing? Like you should be here doing this. And for me to go back, and especially when I made my debut for Gillaroos, like there was a big story that went around, and then they ran the story in the Post-Courier. So when I went back home, my dad was like, hey, like this is big, like let's do something just for the family. But he sent the invitation out to the nearest tribes. And we had like, I did not expect a crowd that big. It was literally our, we call it rapketa in my language, where it means like where it's like the housing scene where everyone comes together, and then we had a lot of people come, and they were just interested to just hear the story. So we had a lot of the head chiefs that went ahead and they gave their welcoming speech and talked about footy and sport in PNG especially. And then, but when they were speaking, like it was like there were other conversations going on or what, there was noise around, but as soon as I got up to speak, like, it just went dead silent. And it's so hard to get a PNG crowd to go dead silent. So it was, it was really, really good to see that they were all so interested, and I think it opened a lot of their eyes, and they were like, oh wow, like she's a girl and she can play. And for the little, especially the little girls, to like look up and be like, if she can follow her dreams and then like play that sport and reach to that level, like if she can do it, like there's no reason why I can't do it. So I think that was the message that I was so proud to talk about and deliver that message to the girls, to see that like you can do anything the boys can do better. Like you can make the rep teams, like it's not hard. You just got to have a passion for what you do and just go at it. So that's really good to see.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're out of time now, but I hope you agree this has just been fabulous to peel back some of the layers, to get a different perspective. You know, we think that sport is a religion in Australia. Well, I think that PNG probably rivals us on that one. Might be time for a PNG sports strategy. I know we've got a few policy makers in the room. I hope that's something that you might be able to take back home with you as well. Please join me in showing your appreciation to our fabulous panel.